So this is David Siegel. I'm a third-year student in the Clinical Gazette program, and I'm here with Virginia O'Hare of the Jefferson Behavioral Health Clinic. Virginia, can you tell us about yourself and your practicum?
Sure, yeah. So I am a licensed clinical psychologist, and this practicum has actually been going on for almost 9 years. So we were located at Drexel, and then when Hahnemann Hospital went bankrupt, we were able to move our whole operation, all of the patients, students, clinicians to Jefferson. So now we're Jefferson Center City Clinic for Behavioral Medicine, and we're a clinic serving patients with a chronic health condition. So we work with a lot of patients with cancer or like diabetes, lung disease, particularly cystic fibrosis, and also like HIV. But really, we take like all comers with a health problem and a concurrent psych issue. Also within our clinic, we run a full model comprehensive dialectical behavior therapy program. And for that, patients don't have to have a chronic illness as well. They could just be, needing or wanting full model DBT.
Great, thank you. And so you mentioned DBT. Are there other treatment modalities or orientations that student clinicians may receive supervision for at your site?
Yeah, so we're for the most part a third wave clinic. So we do regular standard DBT, and then we also do radically open DBT, RO DBT, and that's not as well known in North America, although it's been going on for several decades in England and in Europe. So RO DBT is kind of for the opposite problem as regular DBT. So regular DBT is for under control, radically open DBT is for over control. So think like
Mm.
uptight engineer who can't have a partner because they're too controlled and they're suffering. And then we also do acceptance and commitment therapy. We have a sort of standalone acceptance and commitment therapy group. And we also have several ongoing studies where practicum students can serve as study clinicians for a randomized trial of ACT, for patients with cystic fibrosis versus treatment as usual, all delivered via telehealth. But then also, as well as being third wave, we're also, in all things, there's got to be a dialectic, like a balance. So we
Yeah.
also have a psychodynamic track. So that's also kind of a separate track. So the main supervisor for that is Hallie Kushner. She's worked with me for over 8 years. She's fantastic. And students who choose to do the psychodynamic track, they still get all the other experiences that the general track students get, so like DBT and all of that stuff. And their primary supervisor, Hallie, will help them conceptualize from a psychodynamic perspective.
Wow, that sounds so cool.
Right? Kind of fun.
Yeah. Um, so it could include the modalities. It could be something else. Is there a part of your practicum that you think kind of is sets you apart from some of the other practicums that there are?
Yes, the thing that comes to mind for me is the fact that through word of mouth and through our own efforts to kind of strive towards trans competence, we've ended up being kind of the clinic in the city of Philadelphia for patients who are trans or non-binary or gender expansive and who need or want DBT. So within our regular DBT groups, I'd say about 60% of the participants are trans, non-binary, or gender expansive. So the opportunity to work with those folks and to provide, trans competent treatment, where we've actually adapted several of the DBT skills and included a whole other module that's especially geared to like the needs and just based on like patient feedback from trans patients, like adapting some skills that just aren't going to work with trans patients. For example, go to a coffee shop and don't order anything. Well, like, not only is that a good way to get in trouble if you're clearly in Philadelphia, if you're a person of color, that's a no-go.
Hmm.
Ditto if you're a trans person. A lot of the sort of old school DBT dares are unsafe or just inappropriate for trans people to be practicing. And so thinking about kind of other ways that they can get at the same skills, but not in a way that would compromise their physical safety.
That sounds great.
Mhm.
And could you take a second to describe the culture of the site and the people who are there?
Yeah, so we have, there's me, I'm a full-time psychologist and the primary supervisor. Then there's Hallie Kushner, who is a part-time psychologist. She works with us Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and she conceptualizes from a psychodynamic perspective. And she's also the fidelity coder on our acceptance and commitment therapy with cystic fibrosis studies. So she's kind of involved in all aspects. And then we also have a study coordinator, Chelsea Nurse, who's worked with us for 3 years. Our admin, who has worked with me for the whole time I've been at Jefferson and prior to that at Drexel. And then every year we have about 7 psychology practicum students, and sometimes we also have a social work student as well. So those students come from all over. So like Rutgers, Temple, Penn, Drexel, LaSalle, and our social work students come from pretty much the same, usually like Penn, sometimes Bryn Mawr as well. So there's a good culture of collaboration among the students. So there's always at least 6 other practicum students. So to have a cohort of 7. And definitely the clinic is, right now we're all virtual because of COVID, but typically, we're open door policy, lots of consulting kind of on the fly. But even during COVID, like we have a group text that's from things like celebrating the election to like, I'm stuck with this patient, to what do I do? There's someone screaming outside of my house who's having like a schizophrenic break. So we're kind of constantly like consulting even when we're in this virtual space. So it's great. I love the clinic. I think it's collaborative. We have a really strong social justice mission. So the students can only see patients who are CBH insured. So we see primarily like low income patients who, have just been dealt a really, raw hand, and the acceptance component of the treatments that we're offering, I think really speaks to the fact that you can't just sort of challenge your thoughts and pull out of like systemic racism or poverty, and thinking about ways that we can like use acceptance to then motivate further change.
Wow, that angle sounds really neat. That's great. So I have some more questions here, but I just want to note, whenever you get short on time, just let me know, because I'm
Okay.
sure I could just keep asking questions. All
Sure.
right. Um, so a little more just about the experience.
Mhm.
Can you talk about what an average day might look like for an extern at your practicum?
Yeah, so everyone's there on Monday. So Monday is the one required day, and then the other day is up to you and your program. So Monday starts with, there's probably time for paperwork or see a patient, and then 10 a.m. is didactics. We're all together learning some sort of clinically relevant didactic. It could be, quite often we'll have a guest speaker come. Next week we have actually a former patient and graduate from my DBT program who's kind of talking to us about like borderline personality disorder 201. So she came earlier in the year to talk about kind of intro to borderline from a patient's perspective. And now she's talking about kind of leveling up with our understanding of borderline. We have providers who are trans identified coming to talk with us about kind of working with trans patients or non-binary patients. We have people from the various like primary care clinics that we work with, like for example, from HIV and cancer, coming to talk with us about kind of what to expect in terms of like physical presentations for patients with those conditions. And then a lot of the didactics are run by Hallie and me, just about kind of, today our topic was helping patients to cope ahead for Thanksgiving with COVID. So thinking about kind of plan A for Thanksgiving and then a plan B. So that's the 10 to 11. And then 11 o'clock, we have DBT consultation team. So one of the 4 components of standard DBT is individual weekly therapy, weekly skills group, phone coaching, and consultation team. And so the team is something that all of the DBT providers attend together, and we put ourselves on the agenda, like to talk about our own like burnout and effectiveness, and how we can like increase empathy for our patients, be more skillful, be more effective, etc. So that's team, which counts as a group supervision from 11 to noon. And then noon, see a patient, or have lunch or paperwork. And then 1 until 3 is DBT group that everybody observes. So it's great on Zoom because we can all be observers, like with our camera off and muted. And then when we're back in, in-person life, we have a TV feed to, like a closed circuit TV feed to another room where the students can sit and observe. And then I co-lead with a student for usually 3 or 4 in a row. So every student gets to have the experience of like co-leading in the beginning of the year and then co-leading a second time later on in the year. And I'll come in at kind of the halfway mark to the observe room to answer questions or get feedback, etc. So that's from 1 to 3. And then 3 o'clock see a patient, 4 o'clock see a patient, we're done at 5. And then the other day is up to you and your program, with the exception that on Wednesday, we don't have any groups, so Wednesday's not a great day to choose. So Tuesday we have the radically open DBT group from 10:30 to noon. And then Thursday we have an ACT group from, I think, we have a second DBT group is on Thursday from 10 to noon. And then we have an ACT group from noon to 1. And then on Friday we have a group that's that developed in response to the pandemic, which is like a DBT deep dive. So it started off as kind of applying DBT skills to kind of get through the crisis of the pandemic. And we still return to that, but the patients have just loved this group and they've requested that we keep the group going. So what we do is we'll take kind of a small component of DBT that typically we don't get to really dive into that much. So for example, apparently irrelevant behaviors. That's like those things that you do that end up kind of thwarting your progress. So it could be an apparently irrelevant behavior of, I drove to work the way that happened to go buy Dunkin' Donuts, and then I bought a dozen donuts and ate them all on the way to work. That might be an apparently irrelevant behavior, something that seems so innocuous, but that ends up like taking you out. And so we had a whole session on that. We have a session coming up on dating during the pandemic. We've had a 2-part session on dealing with chronic illness and pain and aging and sort of being in a body and how to use DBT skills to deal with that. So that's the Friday experience. So usually whatever day you choose to be here for your second day of the week, there'll be an opportunity to co-lead a group. And then that's the day that you'll also see most of your patients. And most people carry a caseload of about 10 individual therapy patients. And then there's also this opportunity to serve as a clinician on our acceptance and commitment therapy with cystic fibrosis telehealth study. So that's optional, but if people want to do that, then there's a full day training in ACT. And then that's also kind of part of your clinical work would be to do these sessions. They're only 6 and they take an hour each one, all over telehealth.
Wow, it sounds like such a diverse set of exposures in terms of what you're doing and the modalities and the populations. And then, just to finish up, now that our students will have heard all about you and your site, what are you looking for in applicants?
I missed that because I had some dog squealing in the background. Sorry.
It's okay. I have a puppy myself.
Oh, good.
What are you looking for in applicants? What do you think would make a good practicum student at your site?
So this shouldn't be your first practicum. There's too much going on. There's the patient population is too complex, but it would be a great like second or third practicum. And really the thing that separates students who kind of really take to this practicum and benefit from all of its options versus students who kind of like might find it too stressful is flexibility. So being able to kind of adapt to the fact that when it's not COVID, we actually have a fairly high no-show rate because of things like transportation, et cetera. Working with patients who are like low income, kind of dealing with like systemic oppression, getting to the appointment can be a huge challenge. Now with COVID, it's great. Everyone shows up for everything. And my hope is that we'll be able to keep a telehealth option afterwards, but that entirely depends on CBH, our main payer, and what they're willing to pay for. So kind of my fantasy is that we'll maintain our excellent show rate and you'll be in your office and maybe the patient's coming in, or maybe they text you and say, sorry, my bus didn't come, let's do a Zoom session. And we do that. If that's not the case and we're going back to 100% in person, then there does have to be more flexibility for being able to kind of meet the patients where they're at, have empathy when they're not able to come in. It's not that, you know, they're being jerks. It's that, you know, it's raining and they like literally don't have an umbrella or a raincoat. Or, you know, the bus didn't come or that sort of thing, childcare, illness, yada, 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 life happens. So being able to kind of roll with that and find other ways to, like, if you do have a no-show, what can you do with your time there? Might that be a time to, you know, try to do something for the research study, try to call a patient for ACT with CF, write notes. So kind of being able to go with the flow and be flexible, like that's really the kind of key component. And also being able to either have already had training in or have a strong passion for working with underserved populations and being able to examine like systems of oppression and confront our own role in those systems and be willing to kind of non-defensively do the work to really help our patients to like elevate their own voices.
I think it sounds fantastic, and on behalf of all of our students, we really appreciate you taking the time and your generosity to
Of course.
tell us about everything. So thank you.
Great. And if there are more questions, just shoot me an email. Virginia O'Hare at, no, it's virginia.o'hare, no apostrophe, at jefferson.edu. I'm always happy to answer questions.
Okay, excellent.
Okay.